How to mold dice done quickly. Check out my other video if you want a lot more detail. I'll also include links for everything that I use in this video. We'll make a cap mold specifically. In a cap mold, your die or dice are enclosed entirely in the mold and you pour your cap over it to cover the opening left in your base mold. I'll show you the process using as an example my monstrously large BADONKACHONK D20. First, find the container with a flat bottom. You want at least 1/4 of an inch of empty space on each side or about 1/2 inch for a big die like this one. Use a flat surface like a mirror and lay overlapping strips of tape. Use your container as a pattern to mark and cut this tape, making sure that it fits inside the container. Affix it with double-sided tape. Clean your master with a microfiber cloth to remove any smudges and insert it firmly in the bottom of your container. Whichever face is down will be the top of your mold. Dice makers usually pick the 1 or 20 face. Use keys to create registration marks on your base and cap. Here I use filled-in brass compression sleeves, which are tapered on both ends. Their shape allows the cap to snap into the mold and remain in place. I use tweezers to locate and press the keys into place. Make sure to make a unique pattern so the cap can only be oriented one way. I've sliced my container side so it's easier to demold, so here I seal up those sides with tape to prevent leaks. Make sure you wear gloves and protective glasses when mixing silicone. I use a very flexible silicone called SORTA Clear 12. Silicone is usually a 2-part mix, 50-50, mixed by weight or volume, and takes about 12 hours to cure. I prefer mixing by weight, so use a kitchen scale and estimate how much silicone I'll need. You can mix by hand, but I use a drill bit attachment. Mix for about 3 minutes, making sure to scrape the sides and bottom of the container. If you mix too fast, you'll introduce bubbles. Bubbles rise over time, but I use a dental casting vibrator to accelerate that process. Once mixed, your silicone has a working life of about 45 minutes. Pour your mix into one area of the container and let it spread out. Cover up your master about as much as you left empty space on the sides. Here I cure the mold under pressure. I use a pressure pot, which is basically an airtight container you force air into. The compressed silicone will be stronger and the process virtually eliminates bubbles. I set my molds to cure at a pressure of 45 psi. When you take your mold out after 12 hours, you might find you got a leak or you were too late to try and compress those bubbles. Here the result was not as smooth because I was at the end of the working life. No issues that would impact the casted piece, however. Careful when you demold so you don't damage your container or mold. You might have some general issues you need to clean up with a knife or a cotton ball and some alcohol. Pop out your keys and save them for future use. For the cap and for large pieces like this, I use reservoirs so that I can have extra resin flow into the mold to prevent shrinkage. If I include a reservoir, I'll also include a vent, a secondary opening that lets air escape out when you're pouring down the reservoir. I use funnels for reservoirs so the tip is smaller and easier to finish on the die face. Attach using tape to each corner to prevent trapped bubbles. Now, set up a fence around your mold using tape. This will be your cap. Silicone on silicone will fuse, so add a layer of Vaseline to prevent this. Spread it out using Q-tips. Make sure you apply over the entire face of the mold and inside of the key indentation, but not over the face of the die. Mix and pour your silicone like before. Make sure your lid is thick so its weight helps keep the cap flat. As before, cure under pressure for 12 hours. And voila! Note the much smoother surface, which is the result of getting this into the pressure pot sooner. Take the tape off, reservoirs, and vents. Remove your cap carefully. With smaller dice, just pop them out of the mold. For larger dice, and especially those I will finish on all faces, I tend to slice the size of the molds so the dice are easier to take out and the mold will last longer. Use an X-Acto blade and cut along the edges of the face on the top of the mold. Be careful not to cut yourself or the master. And you're done! One giant BADONKACHONK mold.